All right, good evening everyone. I am trying to do things a little different this week or this month, and it is proving to be a little difficult. So I thought I was going to be able to run this on my laptop, but of course the latest round of updates and now my camera on my several-year-old MacBook Pro is no longer supported. So I'm running an iPad and an iPhone here this evening. I'm going to try to figure out a place to put my iPad so that folks on Facebook don't get sick as I continually move things around. So hopefully folks on Facebook will be able to hear me, because the microphone may be getting blocked on my iPad. So if I could get a thumbs up from somebody, a comms check on Facebook, that would be appreciated. Looks like we've got a lot of folks tuning in on Instagram tonight, and good to see some folks here. And we'll go ahead and get things started this evening. Hopefully you're enjoying the summer. It is definitely summertime here in the interior. The mosquitoes are thick. I was out cutting the grass out at the airport this afternoon and got covered up with mosquitoes. And I think I got my face washed and cleaned off from all the blood splatter that came as a result of that. And actually you can probably see a mosquito flying around here in my dining room at this moment. So anyway, a lot of folks checking in. Good to see that. Again, if I can get somebody watching on Facebook right now to give me a comms check, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I'm not seeing anybody saying they can't hear me, so I'm assuming that that folks are able to hear me there on Facebook with that microphone being somewhat blocked. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the agenda. Again, it is summertime, and the days are getting long with daylight, but short for all the projects that we are all working on, and I'm sure you are in that same boat. Wanted to talk about a few things with you this evening. Now I need to kind of move things again to be able to see my list, but was in a meeting this morning with folks in the Mat-Su Valley with the MEA. That's the electrical co-op there for the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. And they are in the middle of a project right now. They need to add some substations in that area of the valley. One of them in the Meadow Lakes area, and one of them over in the Wolf Lake area. And they are asking for input from the aviation community. So what I need you to do is, if you live in the Mat-Su Valley, if you fly throughout the Mat-Su Valley, I need you to go to mea.coop, C-O-O-P, and go look for major projects down at the bottom of their homepage, and look at that power line project that they've got going on, and offer your feedback as to preferred routes and some other issues that may affect aviation for us. So once again, that web address is MEA, that's Mike Echo Alpha .coop, Charlie Oscar Oscar Papa, and go look at their major projects there at the bottom of the screen to find out some more about that. So yeah, again, they're trying to figure out how to route the power lines there in the Mat-Su Valley so that they're not going to be a problem. I had a long conversation with them. We've got some good folks working with them that are very good about checking on the aviation infrastructure. So again, these power lines are not the huge high tension intertie type power lines, but they are the higher voltage transmission lines, and they are going to be, for the most part, on wooden poles, but a little bit taller than your average phone pole. And so they are very aware that a lot of aviation activity is happening there in the valley, and they want to be aware of what we may have as far as concerns. So once again, that address is mea.coop, C-O-O-P, not your traditional .com or .org or .edu or anything like that. It's .coop, co-op. So something else that has been taking up a lot of my time lately is doing some studying and reading for some information that the FAA has come out with. They came out with a revised advisory circular, and probably the easiest way for you to go find that is just to type in illegal charter or flying for compensation, and it'll pop up trust me, there's been a lot of folks reading that revised advisory circular, and I meant to look that up before this evening so I could have that actual AC number, and I failed to do that before we got started because I had some technical difficulties getting cameras working here. But anyway, something else you could search for on the internet is Safe Air Charter, and FAA Safe Air Charter. The FAA is actually very aggressively pursuing illegal charter operators. And you may be surprised what the FAA would consider an illegal charter to be. We all know that under Part 91 you have to be careful about how you fly when it comes to compensation. There are some very limited things that you can do as a Part 91 pilot without having to go the air taxi route with Part 135 or even the air carrier route with 121. But the FAA is, there's been some serious accidents throughout the most recent years that the FAA is looking and seeing that some of these things are because of an illegal charter operation. Several folks in the lower 48 have already been, like I said, they've had some violations come out against a lot of folks. And the FAA as a whole, not just in the lower 48, is looking at operations to find out whether or not it may or may not be an illegal operation. So again, you know, we all remember from back in our flight training days and conversations we have with one another from time to time that for compensation and hire, compensation includes things far beyond just money. And so you need to be careful what you're doing there and how that works. The FAA's premise is that the flying public, folks that may get in your airplane, have a reasonable expectation of a level of safety that goes beyond what Part 91 affords. And so because of that, the FAA is actively and aggressively pursuing illegal charter operations. So if you want to know more about that, there's been a lot of webinars here in the past month. There's another one coming up here on the 10th, just in a couple of days. Safe Air Charter is what you can search for on your web browser, and just add FAA Safe Air Charter, and you'll find out a lot of information about that. If you got any questions about that, if you're curious as to what your operations are and whether or not it can be considered to be receiving compensation for it, and is it legal, illegal, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. I've been studying up on this for many, many years. A lot of volunteer flying happens here in the state, and there's a fine line as to what's permissible when it comes to how that operates and how that works. Okay, so again, Safe Air Charter is something to search for there on your web browser. Something else that's happening a lot these days is I'm constantly getting notifications from the FAA about NDB decommissioning, non-directional beacon. And you might think in this world of GPS that, you know, who uses NDBs anymore, and do we actually need them? And that's a legitimate question. With GPS, we are very dependent on that platform these days, even to the point that some folks have put all of their navigation eggs in one basket, and that's a dangerous thing. But the official stand of the Alaska Airmen's Association, when we've written letters to the FAA and we've talked about NDB decommissioning, is that we don't want to see a degradation in services. We don't want to see a degradation of access. We don't want to see the risk of operating in the national airspace system become more and more on the shoulders of the operator. And so there have been some NDBs that we've come out in opposition to decommissioning. But I will tell you, as a whole, a lot of the NDBs that they're talking about decommissioning have not been in operation for many years. And so because they have not been decommissioned, they are still on the charts. And some of the instrument approach procedures and navigation routes are allowed to still stay on the charts because that, even though that NDB may not be functioning, it has not been decommissioned. And so it is still available to be put on sectionals and instruments, low altitude and high altitude charts. there is a process underway right now that the FAA is going to add a lot of T routes here in the state of Alaska. Alaska Airmen's Association has been very active in that process, and a lot of the colored airways are being replaced with T routes, and so the need for an NDB to be able to navigate on these routes is not near what it used to be. The stand of the Alaska Airmen's Association has been, again, that we do not want any degradation of access, and so that means we would like to see T routes that are replacing the colored airways to have the same MEA, the same minimum en route altitude, as what the colored airway routes had. Now, that's been a little difficult to do because the FAA has some newer standards when it comes to communication and surveillance, but we're working with the FAA on that. And so again, a lot of NDBs are coming up for decommissioning. I've reached out to several of you that I know operate in some of these areas, that if it's not in your home area, I know that you go there quite frequently, and ask how this may impact you. But if you're curious to know, let me know, and I can send you some of the list of the NDBs that are proposed to be decommissioned in the coming year or so. We know we're not going to be able to keep NDBs forever. I equate it to, you know, if you have a VHS tape, do you even have a VHS player these days to watch that on? And that's several generations back of how to watch video content. But that's what NDBs are. Now, very valid point that we need to have that as a backup. The FAA is looking at ways to have a resilient and redundant navigation system, and there's talk of VORs, there's talk of DMEs, but NDBs are not really part of that conversation in the lower 48 especially, but here in Alaska that's becoming more and more the conversation. So again, look for more information and more details about that as we go along. If you're curious about whether or not an NDB that you listen to or navigate with may be in jeopardy, let me know, and I'll be glad to give you more information about that. I had some fun times last week. I was in North Pole, just outside of Fairbanks. I was invited to come out and watch a demonstration by Aquasi, which is the Alaska Center for UAS Integration. It's one of the federal test sites here in the United States, and they were out with one of their multi-rotor UAS systems, testing an onboard radar that will help them prove and work through the scenarios of sense and avoid. You know, used to pilots, we were told we should see and avoid other traffic. Well, when you're dealing with a unmanned aerial system, sense and avoid is now the new word for that. And those folks up there out of UAF and Aquasi were testing a new radar, mounting it on the actual, not a quadcopter, it was 6 rotors. Is that a hexacopter, I think? Doing that quick. Anyway, a lot of blades on that thing, and trying to keep it under 55 pounds because of the restrictions of the FAA, of course, and testing some ground-based radars as well. And they had a Cessna 206 in the pattern from one of the local air taxis. Wright Air Service was participating in this test. Had some very accurate GPS receivers that were getting position and timing data that they can then go back and compare to the onboard radar and the ground radar they were using to try to match those data up and make sure that everything was calibrated correctly. So very interesting stuff. And the goal is to help prove some systems to be able to sense and avoid other aircraft so that these unmanned systems can fly beyond the line of sight and conduct commercial activity. Specifically in the Fairbanks area, they're looking at doing package delivery from the Fairbanks International Airport to the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital and back and forth. That's just one of the things that they're looking at here for that test site here in Alaska. Lots more ideas and big plans for some possibilities. Even talking about a larger turboprop driven aircraft that we see a lot of here in the state, Cessna Caravan, looking at possibly making that an unmanned freight delivery system. long ways from that actually happening, but maybe not as far off as you might think. So a lot of interesting things happening there, and the Alaska Airmen's Association is active in that conversation, and it was great to go up and see what's happening there with that operation. Thank you to the folks with Aquasi for inviting us there, and thank you to Aquasi for your professionalism. I was very impressed with how professional they were in everything that they were doing. The safety aspects, the briefings that they were doing for each other, just the level of safety and awareness that they had was very encouraging, actually, to see the level of professionalism in that test program, because UAS is here to stay. We are not going to be able to have the world continue with innovation and new technologies without integrating UAS into the national airspace system. And these folks are on the bleeding edge of making that happen, even to the point that there's a little bit of well, frustration may be too strong of a word, but I think we can all understand dealing with the FAA, and the FAA says, well, we don't know exactly how we want to see this happen, but we know sense and avoid needs to occur. And so, well, you tell us what you want, we can probably do it. Well, we're not exactly sure how we want that to happen yet. So going back and forth with all that with the FAA, again, it's because the FAA doesn't have the answers, because the technology is still so immature and young that nobody really knows what we need to be doing just yet. So very exciting stuff, very exciting. So again, I want to talk about the graphical forecast tool for Alaska, and some very, very cool products that are out there right now in an experimental stage that this summer is in the works. So if you're interested in seeing some of that capability, just type in GFA tool in a search bar, and you'll find that there on the aviation test bed, and I'll be glad to send you a link to that. I've talked about that in previous months, but again, they're looking for feedback from folks. So if you're interested in looking at that and seeing what that may do for you as you travel around our state, and what you do for your pre-flight weather briefing and planning, some very good tools that are part of that graphical forecast information. So next item on the long list that I've got for you is the FAA Safety Initiative. The FAA wants to hear from you. They have heard from me an awful lot. I am in the process of formulating my response to the FAA as a part of this safety initiative, but the FAA specifically wants to hear from you as to what you think needs to happen and what you see are deficiencies in Alaska, and what you think needs to change. They also want to hear what you think is working great here in the state. And so I want to encourage you to go search on the internet for the FAA Safety Initiative, and some things will pop up there about looking at a preliminary report. Encourage you to read through that report, and then there's a way for you to schedule an appointment to talk with the FAA and let them know what you see are some of the biggest needs here in the state, infrastructure-wise or procedure-wise or anything, you name it. The FAA wants to hear from you and know what it is that you need to have to be able to be operating a little bit better here in the state. So I just realized here on Instagram that the check-ins and conversations have not been scrolling past as we go through it. So I just wanted a quick check there and make sure no questions have popped up on Instagram. Haven't seen any questions pop up just yet on Facebook. But if you do have a question, go ahead and ask, and I will try my best to address it for you this evening. Something else I wanted to chat with you about. It's that time of year that TFRs are becoming more and more prominent here in the state. I checked this afternoon, and there is 3, 4, 5 TFRs in the state, I believe. One of them for blasting in the vicinity of an airport down in southern Alaska, south central Alaska. Another one for some testing happening out in the Gulkana area out there at the HARP site. There's a TFR over Clear Air Force Station because of the radar they're building there. There's also a TFR there on the Knik Glacier back up outside of Palmer behind Anchorage, because every summer they're out there recovering the remains from that tragic accident many years ago that have now been exposed there on the glacier. So also fire season. One of the reasons why I am here at home doing the update this month is because it is incredibly noisy at the Nenana Airport right now. And that hangar is like being inside of a drum when a Huey flies over. And we had a fire get started not very far south of the airport here, and fun to watch the Fire Boss 802s come in, 4 of them in formation coming over the airport. They came into the float pond scooping water, and then found another lake with a little bit more room because it was kind of tight operating there on the float pond here in Nenana. But then the heliTAC crew coming back and forth, and all afternoon they've been bringing folks in and out with that Huey. And last I checked, there was not a TFR over that fire, but still a lot of activity here in the Nenana area because of a fire that got started last night. It looks like they've got it under control, but that should remind us that it is that time of year when TFRs pop up, sometimes without any warning, that firefighting activity. So please check with Flight Service to make sure that you are aware of the temporary flight restrictions that are popping up, whatever the reason for them that may be. Even though you may be using a tablet in the cockpit, even tied to ADS-B or via the internet, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have an accurate graphical depiction of the temporary flight restrictions. The only way to make sure that you are really current and know what's happening with TFRs is to be in conversation and communication with a flight service specialist here in the state. So use that radio, talk to them over the RCOs, file a pilot report while you talk to them and ask for the updated information of TFRs. But make sure you're being very cautious about where you fly and what's going on. Excuse me. A little bit of a tickle there in my throat. So next item on the agenda this evening is airport access. I actually had a person stop by the Airmen's office this afternoon. I saw this email right as I was getting ready for this tonight. Haven't had a chance to write the back to that person. But this comes up pretty frequently, and it's going to come up more and more. TSA is working with state DOT, and they're concerned about access and security at the Part 139 airports here in the state. Now, you may not know exactly what that means, but essentially, if Raven or Alaska Airlines flies into an airport, that's probably a part, well, it will be a Part 139 airport, because those are air carriers. They need to be able to come in to a Part 139 airport for a lot of the larger aircraft that they fly. And TSA has a standard to be met for access and restricting access and security at those Part 139 airports. Now, where that becomes a problem for us is that if you're a transient pilot coming into, let's just say, King Salmon or Unalakleet or Nome or Dead Horse, and you need to come and go after you've parked your aircraft, how do you do that when there's a gate and it's locked and there's nobody around? And how do you get back and forth? It's a problem. State DOT is trying to figure out a way to make this and to find a solution and make this not quite as difficult for us. But TSA is sticking to their principles about needing to have a level of security that makes it difficult for us to come and go. And so State DOT is working very hard to try to satisfy TSA and looking at a way to have a security badge that will work at all Part 139 airports around the state, because right now you have to get a badge for every single airport, and that's expensive. That's hard to do because there's a test that's involved. There's some training that you need to do. And as a transient pilot that may go in there once or twice a year, do we do that? How do we get in and out of the airport as a transient user? So it is an issue we've been tracking this for a while. I've been involved in a lot of conversations with folks at DOT. DOT is pretty frustrated about this because it's a hard thing. It's a hard nut to crack, and so they're trying to help TSA stay happy, but they're also trying to help us as transit users stay happy to be able to access different parts of the state, especially now that COVID restrictions are starting to ease up in a lot of places, and folks are looking to get out and enjoy Alaska this summer. So stay tuned for more information about that. One other thing I want to talk about is the Anchorage Airspace Study. You've heard me mention this issue several times in recent months and in recent years. And I will tell you that we are a long ways from this being over. This started back in 2018 with a feasibility study. The Air Force is looking to get an ILS into Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. On the Elmendorf side, of course, looking to get an ILS coming in, I believe it's 15 is the runway. I'm just trying to remember now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, the missed approach procedure is going to be a problem because of the CAR-T airspace there at Merrill Field. And so they finished the feasibility study. They say it's feasible to continue and look at this project even more. And it is going to be at least 5 years before anything is finalized. And so it's going to be a long process. There will be opportunities for you to voice your opinion, to voice your concerns. But I just wanted to give you an update that it is moving forward, even though very slowly, and look for opportunities. And I'll be talking about it each month to give you updates. Look for updates in the transponder, our publication going out to members. Look for it on our social media pages and in our emails that we send out to the members as well. So just wanted to keep that kind of floating around in your mind, but it's coming, and we will have an opportunity to participate in that process. A couple of last minute things here I wanted to talk about because I want to try to keep this under 30 minutes. I've had a couple of folks reach out to the Airmen's office complaining about low-flying aircraft and noise associated with it. And so it's a tough subject. Those of us who are pilots, we enjoy the sound of a 185 wrapped up on takeoff with a seaplane prop, right? It's loud, but man, does that sound awesome. We love the sound of a Beaver with a radial taking off. And I'll admit the sound of a Super Cub flying low down the river sounds great too. But not to everybody. Had a person reach out to the Airmen's office about a week ago that just finally had enough of airplanes circling overhead, low level, doing maneuvers. They were asking, who is this person? How do I report them? How do I make it stop? They're being rude. And actually the word shenanigans was used to describe the activity. So I had an opportunity to help educate that person a little bit that there may be a legitimate reason for an aircraft to be circling. It could have been doing a game survey, because we know aircraft are used by Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife for game surveys, and the only way to do that is by flying low and sometimes flying a pattern. Civil Air Patrol flies patterns all the time for practice and for actual searches. Lots of reasons for an aircraft to be flying in patterns. Flight training, which this seems that this issue was a flight training activity. It was in an area that a flight school uses as a practice area, and this person just had enough. And so after digging a little bit deeper, it appears that it's not necessarily new, but there's been an uptick in traffic. Well, of course, we all know that flight training activities kind of increase in the summertime. We also know that in the past year, there hasn't been as much flying for a lot of us. And so what I want to ask all of you to do is to be a good neighbor. Be aware of what your airplane sounds like as you take off at maximum horsepower and maximum RPM to get over those trees at the end of the float pond. But if you don't need to have it wrapped all the way up to 2850, pull it back. If you don't need to fly treetop level, go up a little bit higher. if you don't need to be circling for 10-15 minutes because you're trying to figure out where that moose is and try to just keep track of those animals so that maybe when it's time to go out in September, you know what their patterns are, fly a little bit higher. Try to be a good neighbor. Try to be somebody that that when somebody starts complaining about aviation, you're able to give a reasonable response. Don't take the attitude like, well, you know, we can do whatever we want. It's a free country, which, believe it or not, I've had people tell me that when I've talked about this subject in the past. So please be aware that not everybody enjoys the sound of a radial. Not everybody enjoys the sound of the prop tips breaking the speed of sound. Some of us do. I am one of those people. But if it happens over your house all day, every day, you'd probably grow tired of it too. So be a good neighbor. Be careful where you're flying. Be careful of how low you're flying. Be aware that other people are around and they may not appreciate it as much as you do. So the last thing I wanted to chat with you about is I am this close. For those folks that, yeah, I got two different cameras. Make sure Instagram and Facebook can both see. I'm going to be heading down to the lower 48 to pick up our 206 that I use for some of the other things I do for an occupation. The Alaska Airmen's Association is not the only thing I do. I do government affairs for the Alaska Airmen's on a part-time basis. And so I guess one of my full-time jobs, because all of them seem to take up more than just part-time. So great comment there, Chris, by the way, just nice distraction. I'd lose weight from running outside to see the radial engines fly over. Yep, that's one way to get your cardio in, isn't it? So back to, you may remember back in December, I talked about flying our 206 down to the lower 48 to Spokane and my experiences clearing Canadian customs and coming in and out of the U.S., doing that back in December. I am very close. Matter of fact, they're supposed to do the return to service flight tomorrow. And there is a possibility here within the next week to 2 weeks that I will be heading down to Spokane to fly that airplane back. So look for next month. I'll give you an update as to how that trip went, talking about my interactions and how clearing customs and all of those things went. There's a slight chance that I'll be able to fly nonstop from the Bellingham, Washington area to Ketchikan. We'll have to wait and see how the aircraft performs. We did a lot of upgrades and things to it. So there is a chance that I may not have to clear customs because I can go nonstop. But weather, of course, is going to be the big factor for that. So I just wanted to kind of give you a teaser for next month as to something that I'm looking forward to being able to share with you, my experiences flying back up to Alaska from the lower 48 with our 206 and how that works. So haven't seen any questions come in. A few comments come in this evening. Nice to see a lot of folks watching, popping in and out, both on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm going back and just scanning through right quick to make sure there's not a question that I've missed. But if anybody does have a question here at the end, go ahead and ask it. If not, hopefully you have my email address. If you don't, probably the easiest thing to do is to go to the Alaska Airmen's website, go to alaskaairmen.org, and you can find my contact information there. Would love to chat with you. Love to convince you to become a member if you're not already a member. And if you are a member, thank you very much for your support. It's your membership that allows me to go interact with the FAA and with DOT and other levels of government and advocate for our needs as aviators here in the state of Alaska, and also not just the pilot side, but the mechanic side as well. So all of those things are very important. So with that, not seeing any questions or anything, again, trying to keep it as close to 30 minutes as we can. I guess I'll sign off for now, but looking forward to talking to you again next month and hopefully be able to give you some information about how my trip through Canada, or at least over Canada, will have gone by the time we talk again. So my email address, if you don't want to get on the website to find that out, is adam.white@alaskaairmen.org. and look forward to talking with you. And send me an email. Let me know what's going on where you are. Let me know how your summer's going. Tell me what your plans are and where you're going to hopefully go out and enjoy flying around the state this summer. So with that, I will sign off and say good night, and we'll talk to you next time.